Welcome to the podcast. Once again, my name is Father Bill W., and I'm an Episcopal priest. I am in long-term recovery, celebrated 50 years last December, and purpose of these podcasts is to go a little bit deeper into the history and the psychology and the spirituality that underlies the 12-step program. So I invite you to visit our website. It is titled Two-Way Prayer. And if you haven't done so, please watch the new video that's up there. It's about a 40-minute video on the two-way prayer practice, using it to kind of replace the workshops I was doing during the pandemic. If you would like to write us, you can drop me a line at two-way-prayer, TWO, two-way-prayer, @gmail.com. And we are doing the second of a very short series focused on the original 11th step, we would call it in our 12-step jargon, exploring the practice of two-way prayer, how it was done in the Oxford group and how that was carried over by some, but then lost as AA progressed. And my guest in guiding us through this is Jean Brown. Jean is from Adelaide, Australia. Born in the UK, her parents and grandparents were all active in the Oxford group, and she worked with the group when it was known as Moral Rearmament, and as it continues today, now known as Initiatives of Change. And I will put a link to that in the show notes as well. Jean's been a worker in the field of reconciliation. That's our 8th and 9th step on a world scale, right? Goes where conflict is happening, and how do you bring peace to people who are maybe at war with one another, hate one another, were injured by one another. And she's done that work in India, the United States, Africa, and now she's doing it in Australia. Jean is an author and wrote a marvelous pamphlet. It's called A Serious Guide to Remaking the World. I've made that available, or she has made it available for us in the show notes as well. Download a copy. I think you'll find it very, very interesting. I came across it a number of years ago and found it very insightful in terms of presenting a very simple picture of what this change process is really all about, and running through it is the two-way prayer, the practice of listening to God and receiving guidance. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So Jean, welcome back. Enjoyed your first episode. I hope you've recovered from that by now. Have you?
Thank you. Yes, Bill.
Good to have you. Good to have you. In our first episode, you shared your story and also the story of your parents and grandparents and your time in moral rearmament. And Jean, you bring some really helpful perspective on some of the early days. And now I'm hoping that you will take us deeper into some of the principles and practices of what we'll call the Oxford group, although it probably wasn't that by the time you joined it. And members of the group were known as soul surgeons and as life changers. And they were interested in changing individuals one at a time, but ultimately with the goal of changing the world, changing nations, and having a real effect on the global problems that we face. And God, that's never been more true than it is today. So they saw something was wrong with the world, Jean, huh? And let's start with that. What is it, or was it? Well, is it that needs changing?
Well, there's always demons of course, greed and self-interest, but I think Frank Bookman saw in the 1920s with a sort of stubborn clarity, perhaps from his own experience, how unhealed histories, the instinct to blame, it's the favorite global game, really, the blame game, scapegoating, others. These things only perpetrate injustice and war. So his change starts with me, experience and conviction. Really a message of his Christian faith, and yet so unpracticed.
Mm-hmm.
As he famously commented about the League of Nations, which came prior to the United Nations.
Yes.
He said the problems on the table are nothing compared to the problems around the table,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody is tackling them. So his passion was that the worst of human nature can be changed, and that is the root of the problem everywhere. And as individuals choose to be part of the answer instead of being part of the problem, that's the lovely choice that each of us has all the time. And that changed people can change the world. So I think he saw the scale, the seed of it in the worst of human nature, in all of us, but inflated and controlled and used, becomes sort of the seedbed of the terrible things that are happening in the world, whether it's from the way we're dealing with the planet Earth or deal with each other. Unhealed histories.
Yeah, the world will not be the same as a result of our being here. Either it will be better or it will be worse.
Right,
But
right.
it won't be the same. We have an influence, maybe small in our family and our community, but that's how it's going to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I was out to change the world as in my radical days as a young man, but I hadn't changed myself.
Me too.
And, it's not
Yeah,
going to work. Had to go inside and make those changes. So
yeah, yeah.
trying to make up for it now in my old age. So might be a little
Never too
healthy.
late. Never too
It's
late.
never too late. One of the things that I was really taken with, and I think I mentioned this in our last episode, was you're identifying three little words that are a lovely summary of for us, the 12 steps, but for yourself, perhaps the change process. And those were connection, correction, and direction. In 12-step terminology, the first connection would be the first few steps, but then correcting what's wrong, and that's half of our steps, what's wrong with and needs to be changed in us. And this is what I want to focus on in this second episode, is direction, how that's understood. But just a kind of a quick review on connection, Gene. What is it that you're saying people need to connect to or with?
Yeah, well, first of all, just to comment on the flow of the three,
Mm.
that it's a flow that you can kind of live in all the time. Connection, correction, direction. And I often think connection and correction are the best preparation for direction. I mean, for me personally, I seek to connect with God, with the Spirit of Jesus, the universal loving intelligence, as I've heard
Hmm.
it called, the spirit behind creation, the truth, goes by many names. And I urge people to connect with the deepest, the highest spirituality they know, whatever they call it.
Hmm.
I remember learned from reading the Hindu Vedas the difference between the small s self and
Yes.
the big S self, the divine center, and being self-centered in the terms of the big S self, that we're all called to be self-centered with the big S self. That's our divine identity. And the small S self, which is my little sort of agitated ego, often vies with that. But I thought in this secular and cynical age, people are invited into this listening experiment with the source of love as they best understand it.
Right.
It's connecting with that, and it's also connecting with the needs of the world around you, with the intention of being of some service. So
Yeah. I was reading a book
uh,
recently. If you read the Gospels, Jesus talks frequently about the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven in Matthew. And this fellow was writing about Well, it's always a choice. It's the kingdom of God or the kingdom of self. You know?
Smallest self.
Yeah, which one will it be?
Mm,
And
yeah.
it's making that change and connecting, as you say, with that power uh,
Mm.
that's already present in us.
Oh, that's absolutely.
Quite
Yeah.
amazing. It's not
Yes.
some great search I have to go on.
That's right.
Right
Right.
inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then correction, Gene. What's the correction about?
Yeah. Well, we all need correction, that's for sure. Because otherwise we would remain stuck. So of course it's a gift, really. How else do we grow? We,
Hmm.
um, but for me, it's certainly been about there's the putting things right. I've lost my temper. I've felt very mean. I can be very mean spirited. I'm shocked at myself often. Forgiveness, and apology. Often, time when I'm made aware of where I've hurt someone, and so on. And even more these days for me now, my great age, it's almost more about correcting how I see things, a judgment that I may have made about a person. So quick often to judge. Somebody said, turn judgment into curiosity. It's a very different mindset.
Hmm.
So often there's this time of correction is a resetting, review. So many distortions and misinformation to sort through, work through. So it's a precious time of that, realigning, seeing through a different lens from my probably more instinctive self-centered lens.
And Bookman was very big on making amends, making restitution.
Yeah, yeah.
I was at Co. I've been there a couple of times, which is the Center for Initiatives of Change in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
And I was deeply moved. There was a group of Indians who were from Canada. And the Prime Minister had just recently, the Prime Minister of Canada had recently apologized to the indigenous people
Mm-hmm.
for all of the injustices that they suffered. And when they were up telling that story, they were in tears. You could feel the reconciliation had happened, and it just couldn't happen without that owning our part in it.
Absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. Oh, forgiveness and apology is a huge factor in restitution. Very, very hard to do. And today in Australia, in fact, we're celebrating the anniversary of what we call National Sorry Day, when our Prime Minister made an apology to the stolen generations of Aboriginal people. And while it's not it's never the end of solving everything. It's a tremendous beginning and a tremendous moment for the nation, which we're continuing.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So I do the attempt to connect, and then I
Mm-hmm.
correct all of the things that are wrong in my relationship with the higher power, with God, whatever that might be, and with people that I've harmed. Uh, but then comes the part that I think we've really lost, I know, in our 12-step world. And that was the focus on leading a guided life,
Mm,
receiving direction. So that's your third word,
yeah,
direction.
yeah,
It's critical, isn't it?
absolutely. Yes, the search for direction, individually and collectively. It was
Yes.
very central to our daily practice. Frank Bookman, I think he took the idea seriously when he felt his counseling of students was missing this dimension. And that's when he started his daily practice to really seek for the higher wisdom to direct him. And it's entirely logical and practical to expect next steps to be revealed on this journey, which is about our doing and our being together.
It comes as a bit of a shock to some people, though, that you're really going to. It's like you have this higher power,
Mm,
and it's sort of in a vacuum.
mm,
And Bookman said, no, it must become real.
mm,
It
mm.
must become
Yeah,
relational.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, to me, direction is also, of course, about the direction we're taking in life in general. So beyond the daily steps, which one might be shown or given in that quiet time,
Right.
then it's the bigger picture of
Yes.
what we're living for. That sense of direction for my life impacts on all my major decisions. And often in this time of silence, inner listening and reflection, there's a need of some realignment of that. So there's sort of the whole sense of the direction of my life. What am I about? What am I here for? As well as those daily steps, the little prompts.
My experience, I want to kind of compare notes with you. It's a
Yeah.
marvelous opportunity. Yeah, I can agree fully with what you're saying. There's sort of the daily guidance that I receive to do
Yeah.
this, to do that. But then there are the bigger life decisions that I have to make. Do I
Mm.
take this job? Do I move to this country even?
Mm.
And those, what I do, Gene, is I don't just take one answer.
Mm.
I will bring it back repeatedly
Mm.
over the course of, if I have time, 2 or 3 weeks or months or whatever it might be. And what I see or sense is it's
Mm.
continually prompting, pushing, leading me in a particular direction. This
Mm.
feels right.
Yeah, that's the gut feeling.
Yeah. Am I on
Yeah,
track? I'm on track with that.
yeah, I feel too. I mean, as I remember somebody saying, we either live reactively or we live reflectively,
Hmm.
and the reaction is the sort of the jump. Where I think you're describing something much more reflective, a process where you're taking the time to really think it through, pray it through, um, ask for guidance, on major decisions.
Yeah.
Um, I remember when my husband asked me to marry him, which is a fabulous long story, but anyway, he was in another country and I hardly knew him. I decided to sleep on it. And I was sharing a room with a Japanese friend, and she didn't sleep all night because she was imagining this poor young Australian waiting for an answer. Anyway, I had a good sleep, but in the morning I just took a long, quiet time,
Hmm.
you know, to before I considered how I respond. But I really prayed and listened and a lot of things were revealed to me at that moment. Yes, well, naturally the answer came back yes, but say yes. But being aware that one's life direction is pointing in the right way, on the right
Hmm.
course, you're feeling guided to live by.
Yeah, the big book that we use is that we will intuitively know. Our minds will be placed on a higher plane.
Right. Mm, yeah.
That's getting at what Bill Wilson and the early people in AA were
Mm,
experiencing as they participated in this practice.
mm, mm.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
There is a pamphlet that some listeners may be familiar with. I'm going to put it again in the show notes. It's a pamphlet that circulated in Akron, Ohio in the late 1930s. It was written by a chaplain, John Batterson, who was apparently a member of the Oxford group, and it's a nice summation of the guidance, the two-way prayer practice. And what I thought would be helpful is to ask Jean to share her reflections with us on some of his comments. So he says this, starts it off. There are a few simple suggestions. These are a few simple suggestions for people who are willing to make an experiment. You can discover for yourself the most important and practical thing any human being can ever learn: how to be in touch with God. All that is needed is the willingness to try it honestly. Every person who has done this consistently and sincerely has found that it really works. One of the things I really got in studying Oxford group material was that they approach this whole thing in terms of an experiment. Just try it. We're not
Mm,
here to convince you with words. We're here to uh, explain to you a very simple practice, ask you to do it at, as an experiment, and see what happens.
Mm.
Is that about right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's really part of this adventure that we're all invited to make this experiment for ourselves. No one can do it for us, and it is just as simple as sitting silently, heart and mind open, defenses and pretenses dropped, and just, God, whatever I know of you, please speak to me and show me what I should be and do.
And then stop talking.
Yes, it's a brief question.
A brief question. I tell people that, just a
Yes,
sentence or two. That's
yes,
all you need to say. God already
yeah,
knows what your
he knows
needs are, you
exactly. He
know.
knows.
Yeah.
I find, yeah,
Go
yeah.
right
Go.
ahead.
No, I'm just saying that his responses often are equally brief. I find
Yeah.
satisfyingly so. I mean, maybe it's my simple mind that suits. I was grateful that I came to believe in an invitational God. For me, it's been very much like that. My relationship with God and that sense of invitation to do and be the best I can, which carries with it a lot of respect for my autonomy. We're invited to act as God's head, hearts, and hands in this crazy world, but it's an invitation to do that. There's no insistence. So,
Very true. The pamphlet then lays out some very basic Oxford group beliefs. Uh, Lists them like this: God cares for you very much, is interested in your life, has a plan for your life, has an answer for every need and problem you face, will tell you all that you need to know, will not always tell you all that you want to know. So, this idea of a plan, could you speak to that?
yeah, yes. I mean, first of all, from what he says in that pamphlet, that's a constant, that affirmation of being loved, being known.
Yes.
That's one of the huge gifts of the quiet time, to receive that affirmation each day. Yes, I believe that there is a universal plan for every human born, the universal plan for each of us to learn to love, to become fully human, to care for this world and all within it, to play our part in the healing and restoring of what is hurt and broken. So I feel that is a universal plan and invitation for everyone.
Yes.
And then yes, I do believe that there is an individualized, custom-made calling for each
Mhm.
person. If we want to find it, again, I never am aware of any huge "you must."
Right.
Aristotle said that where your passion meets the needs of the world, that is where your calling lies. And so that identification of your own passion and the needs of the world around you.
Little
And
Joseph Campbell, follow your bliss.
right, yeah, okay, that's a
Yes.
similar sort of thing, yes.
Hmm.
And some, it's interesting to me that some feel very clearly early on in life exactly sort of where that sense of calling lies, and perhaps others never fully feel that they've actually found it. It's the unselfish search. The intention is the key, of course. But as long as we learn to love and to become fully human as God designs us to be, I think we will have at least followed that sense of universal calling. So to me, that is the plan, that we find and follow that. I don't think there's anything spooky about it.
I agree. Hey, Batterson then offers some very specific instructions, and I've updated these a little bit in a version, hopefully a little bit more modern. One of the things I've changed, Gene, I'd be interested in your comment on this. After I've asked for whatever guidance I may need, briefly, as you say, then I say, imagine God's using a term of endearment. my beloved, my child, my brother, some
mm,
term of endearment. And I just found that tremendously helpful. So
mm,
I kind of write that down, and it puts me in the flow, you
mm,
know. So, I mean, I don't think there are any hard and fast rules, or not that many, for this
mm,
practice. And
mm.
it's very open to individual temperaments and how God works with each one of us, eh? But yeah, I digress. All right. So, so we're going to stay with the original version in this interview. So Batterson writes this: take time, be alone and undisturbed. Early morning is best.
Yeah. Yes, I've tried to practice this every day for 56 years now. Of course, there are those times also during the day when one may not be alone or undisturbed,
Hmm.
but one can still intentionally go deep into silence and deeply within for some guidance or for a reset. Yeah, I think the morning, early morning, is
Hmm.
for me now. It's usually about 7 o'clock. I get up at 6:30. I do some exercise, and then basically from 7 to 8, because that's the timing I've got available now. But usually try for about an hour with a bit of
Hmm.
some inspired reading,
Yes.
and certainly some time of just slightly more meditative or contemplative practice,
Hmm.
being aware of where I'm sitting and the space around me, and inviting the spirit to be present and just feel it. Um, yeah, to feel God's love around me. Often there's something that's kind of immediately wanting attention. So
Hmm.
to be able to set things aside for a few moments. The Buddhists have a lovely saying about the mind is like a tree full of monkeys. So we chatter, chatter, chatter. So sort of addressing those monkeys early on, and identifying them, and giving a big kick in the pants to those who shouldn't be there. But maybe those who do need a little bit of attention, to
Uh,
assure them. Look, I often write them down because I can assure them that, don't worry, I'll come back to you. I will pay you some attention. But right now, I need this space to be alone with God. And that aloneness with God, I found quite hard to come by initially,
yes.
and was given some lovely experiences which really helped me to find that alone space. Some fears, I think, of sometimes of being alone and empty and still. Stillness is an important aspect of it for me. I know people like to walk because they have their quiet times, but I find that stilling the body, stilling the mind,
Hmm.
the emptying, the creating the space, the surrender.
Yeah, well, Batterson would agree with you. He says, sit in a comfortable position,
Yeah,
consciously relax all your muscles, be loose. There is
yeah.
no hurry. There needs to be no strain during these minutes. God
Mm,
cannot get through to us if we're tense and anxious about
mm,
later responsibilities.
mm,
It's really good advice for any form of meditation. And some people
yeah.
do centering prayer as part of this practice. I know a number of people that I encourage them to do that first and then do the two-way prayer
Mm, mm,
because it
mm.
helps with the quieting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think to spend some time, maybe not immediately, but to be able to look at the causes of the anxiety or the strain. I think sometimes we live with things without ever actually stopping to really look at them and address them and understand where they're coming from, and then ask God to show us any steps that can be taken to remedy. Quite often we get stuck in a blame.
Tune in, open your heart to God, either silently or aloud. Just say to God in a natural way that you would like to find His plan for your life. You want His answer to the problem or situation that you're facing just now. Be definite and specific in
Mm,
your request. I have a problem and I need help. Some people
it's
object to that. They say, well, you shouldn't do that. I find it's necessary.
Absolutely. I mean, it's part of the relationship, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
you need help. I'm trying to think of something specific. I mean, the other some a couple that we've been wanting to help as their marriages struggle, and both my husband and I had a sense we should go and see the husband on on a particular day, and it happened to be a particular day when the wife turned up. She wasn't expected, and that
Hmm.
very night she had an extraordinary encounter with God in the night, and something had really happened where she'd let go of her anger, and something happened in that moment of them coming together, and I think us being there to witness some of what they were sharing with each other was quite important. So it was a very definite moment of instruction to go and to be there with them in accompaniment. But when I sit down for the quiet time, this first moment of surrender, of letting go of my immediate plans, my immediate thought processes, it's so precious. To go intentionally into the silence,
Hmm.
where you dare not to be in control. It's so contrary to certainly my nature. Always the desire to be in control, let go and let God, as someone said.
Yeah.
This definitely is a space where you're handing over control.
Space is a good word. It's like I can sense my ego mind active, monkey-like, all of that stuff. And there's kind of a conscious decision to relax it, to let it go. And then there's an opening. It's like the ego has to cooperate in this process. You're not going to kill the ego,
Mm,
but you can
yeah,
reduce it in size and in power.
that's right.
And then you get to experience this other self, this capital S self that's
Mm,
been waiting to speak to us anyway.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think cooperating with the small s self, not it plays an important part in our
That's
lives, but
right.
it
Yeah.
shouldn't be dominating. So we
That's
need to
exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. And it is when it dominates that I have the problems.
yes, particularly for me, it pops up its head when it's I feel I'm not getting credit for something which was perhaps my idea. That sort of ridiculous little things like that, where the what it said, Bible, in honor preferring the other, that lovely phrase. But being able to share credit, be able to honor others, respect others, that
Right.
sort of getting credit, being jealous has definitely been a bit of a bugbear of mine.
Yeah.
And
I mean, Jung would say this is the shadow self.
the shadow self, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
the parts of us. And I mean, I've gone a little further. I do some Jungian stuff. I let them talk, you
Mm,
know. I'll
mm,
sometimes sit down and talk to this little part of me who is jealous. What's
right.
going on? Who are you in there?
Mm,
And let them speak. And I listen to them. Well, tell me more. Tell me more.
mm,
It's quite an entertaining encounter with my depths
yeah, yes, yeah, yeah. That's fascinating. All the
yeah,
different voices that we
that we have.
encounter and listen to.
That's right. That's right. And I notice this about people that they're quite willing to yield to some of the negative voices, to the
Mm,
addict voice or the controlling voice or the
mm,
condemning voice, but they're
mm,
very resistant to listening to the God voice.
mm. Very interesting. Very
Yeah,
interesting.
pretty fascinating.
Yeah. So, who's in charge of your life?
Yeah, 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 yeah. And that's what the Jungians would say, and that's what the Christians would say, and I think it's probably what every religious, you know,
Mm,
you answer that who is in charge?
mm,
I
mm,
have to serve somebody, as Dylan wrote in his song, you know, who's it gonna be?
mm,
And if I'm serving myself, I'm trapped. I'm
mm,
just trapped. And if I'm serving money or power or sex, or alcohol or whatever, I'm also trapped there. That's where the addictions
Yeah.
come
Yeah.
in. But
Yeah.
serving, and I loved what you said in our last episode. We talked about the four absolutes, and you spoke of them, as first time I've really heard this, as the four freedoms.
Mm.
To be free,
Yeah.
it comes with being honest. There's a freedom that comes with being honest and loving
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
unselfish and pure.
Yeah.
It is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he
Yeah.
says, just be still, quiet, relaxed, and open. Let your mind go loose. Let God do the talking. Thoughts, ideas, and impressions will begin to come into your mind and heart. Be alert and aware and open to every one. And then he says, write it down as it comes. Speak about the importance of writing.
Yeah, indeed, it's very helpful. As someone said, the strongest of memories is weaker than the palest of ink. So, of course, one can forget things so quickly. And of course, there are often thoughts that one would prefer to forget. So, it's so it's a lot harder to forget them if you've written them down. It's also a wonderful sorting process. Just as we're talking about all these different voices, the small self and the little jealous voice or whatever it is, the little bitter voice. Writing, they'll intrude. Writing everything down gives one a chance to really reflect and sort through. Is this in line with what I understand of God? Is this a voice of love, of honesty, of unselfishness, of purity? Then it's much more likely to come from God, and so you can begin to get a sense of discernment there, because it's all written down. It's also a lot easier then to share with another person because because it's written, and you're less likely to forget. And it's interesting that very often the thoughts that come, there's a certain clarity and simplicity
Mm-hmm.
capture on paper, which you lose a bit when you start to sort of ponder it and think about it and play with it. And if you then
Right.
try to write it down, an hour later, yes, you probably get a lot more complex way of presenting the thought.
I think you had said you tend to write them very short, uh, capture the thought, not so much sentences or paragraphs or things like that. Eh?
Yeah, yeah.
Is that your style? There doesn't have to be any one style. I started off that way, and then I moved to sentences and paragraphs, and I just allow it to flow.
Yes, it's probably a variety for me. I mean, there's the sort of the one-word prompts, or the simple sentences, but occasionally, yes, I'll write
Oh, good.
longer, more of a sort of, it's more my reflecting around a particular thought line that has been presented to me, a particular issue, or a certain sense of processing that I feel, I pray that God is informing, and it can be quite helpful to write it out a bit more fully as I think it through. So, as you say, there's absolutely no one way. I certainly don't think that all the thoughts I have in my quiet time are divinely inspired necessarily.
Well, that brings us to the next point in the little pamphlet, and that is checking on the thoughts, which was an Oxford group a practice as well. You check on them, eh? So you've written them down, and then you're going to examine them. And I think this is where the four standards, the four absolutes, also come in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Is this thought honest? Is it pure? Is it unselfish? Is it loving?
Yep.
What I've read is what they would say, if it is not, you can toss it out. Can't be from God.
Mm. Well, you can probably still learn from it, but
You can
then
learn from, oh, absolutely. Yeah.
toss it out.
And then, and watch it come back.
That's why.
Yeah. But do you use the absolutes as guides in your practice?
Yes, I do. For discernment, and as friends, I think I mentioned this before that
Mm-hmm.
they so often when people first meet them or any set of values, there's that sense of rules. These are not rules for oppression.
Yes.
These are tools for liberation. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we said this before. There's no there's no exact right or wrong way for doing this writing, this having these quiet times. I certainly was never taught that. I believe Bookman used to scribble things on the backs of old envelopes, because one can be obviously open at any time for God's promptings and leadings.
Did you ever hear of fingertip guidance?
No.
I've come across that in some of my research that if they didn't have pen and paper, they would join their index finger and their thumb together
Uh-huh.
and then listen.
Right, right.
I thought that was very interesting, and I've tried it. It's very helpful for me.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think there's
Well,
nothing.
I get to teach you something, Gene. I'm very happy about that.
I know about that posture, but I hadn't understood its meaning. So
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there's nothing magical or sacred in writing one's thoughts. It's
Right.
again, it's just the most practical tool for remembering, for being able to share from with another person, to look back
Yeah.
with, see patterns of thought. I think a lot of what we're talking about, you can easily make it into something a bit
Mystical and
yes, that's right.
yes.
Intensely practical.
Right. That's right. That's right. And I want to talk about blocks because I think this is important. Batterson mentions blocks in receiving guidance, and here's what he says. He says, "What if I don't seem to get any definite thoughts? Guidance is as freely as available as the air we breathe. If I'm not receiving thoughts when I listen, the fault is not God's. Usually it's because there is something I will not do, some wrong in my life that I will not face or make right, a habit, an indulgence I will not give up, a person I will not forgive, a wrong relationship in my life I will not give up, a restitution I will not make, something God has already told me to do that I will not obey. Check these points and be honest, and then try listening again." Now, some of the best quiet times I've had is when I am just in a mess. I don't want to be there. I'm not feeling holy or surrendered. And I just admit that and then listen.
Excellent. A great start.
Yeah, yeah. Because it's honest. It's honest.
And he loves us just the same.
Just as
Yeah,
we are. Just as we are.
that was my message this morning, really.
Was
Yeah,
that right?
yeah.
Just as you are. Yeah.
Yeah. I was,
Yeah.
uh, I was I was complaining, as women often do, that I'm far too overweight, and I felt God saying, "Well, if you lost some weight, you might feel better about yourself, but it will make no difference to how much I love you."
Beautiful.
So that was great.
Beautiful. That is great. Yeah.
Help me
And
really start the day. Yeah,
yeah.
well, we often get stuck. If we don't obey, we do get stuck. And I remember once I had the same thought, but exactly the same wording, simple thought of an action to take six
Yes.
mornings in a row.
Right.
It was 6 mornings. I'd sit down to a quiet time, and because I was not willfully disregarding it, but
Right.
I didn't take it seriously, but it kept coming back. But when I did follow it, it's too
Yeah.
complicated a story to tell you, but it resulted in an action that had far-reaching, unexpected political consequences. I mean, it wasn't all about what I did, but it's almost like I had just a little piece in a puzzle
Right.
that I had to follow, and the far-reaching consequences were extraordinary.
And you kind of blew it off for
Yes,
5 or 6 days.
yeah,
Didn't
absolutely.
pay any attention to it.
It just seemed a bit silly, really.
Yeah, I do. I don't know where I got this, but if I receive specific guidance to do something, when I read what I've written after I'm done, and I put a little box next to it.
Right.
Okay, and then when I go back the next day to do my quiet time, before I write, part of my practice is to check were the boxes checked.
Mhm.
Did I do that?
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and oftentimes, no, I didn't. I just blew God off, which is very interesting, isn't it? I've had specific guidance to do something, and I said, blah, I'm too busy.
Yeah.
But even the small things, Gene, if I get guidance to do, and I kind of limit myself to 5 or 6 things so that because I don't want it to be a to-do list, you know what I mean? Uh, but the days when I just do those things, not
Mm,
even knowing why I'm doing them, but I'm being obedient
mm,
to the guidance, that has
yeah.
become more and more important to me over the
Yeah.
years.
Yes, that's the. I mean, well, the thought sort of opens the door, but obedience is the taking the steps through the door, isn't it? And
Exactly.
there's a fascinating thing. I believe that the word absurd comes from the Latin absurdus, which means not listening. So
Mm.
an absurd life is a life of not listening.
Oh, I
And
like that.
obedience also comes from, I think, a Latin to do with listening, obedire, which is a quality of listening with the intention of responding, the willingness to respond. So, I love the fact that both those words
Yeah,
are
yeah, yeah.
in listening.
Yeah,
And
and it can be the smallest thing. I might have heard, well, go work in the garden,
mhm,
you know?
mhm,
But if I'm doing it consciously and willingly,
yeah,
there's a different feel to that action.
mhm,
I'm being obedient. And in the
mhm,
obedience, I'm listening and connecting.
mhm, mhm. I have a friend who, when he started this practice of listening, two-way prayer, he had a thought. He was sitting down expecting, a great
Yeah.
earth-shaking thought, as we tend to at the beginning.
Hmm.
And, gosh, this is God speaking to me, to be great. And
Hmm.
the only thought that came to him was that he should tidy his bed, make his bed. And he thought, this is terrible. This is goodness me, this is ridiculous. This is not, what on earth am I thinking? And he actually had a terrible relationship with his stepmother at the time. Anyway, every time he sat down to try and have a quiet time, feeling that, gosh, I'm a good enough person, I should expect some noble thoughts.
Yes.
He would,
Come on, God.
yeah,
Do you know who you're talking to here?
anyway, he would insistently get this, make your bed.
Yeah.
And then he shared it with a friend, his friend who was also practicing listening. And the friend said, well, why don't you do it? So he started to tidy up his bed every day, make his bed every day. And his stepmother was absolutely amazed.
Yeah.
She came to him and said, Jim, what has happened to you? And their relationship just changed drastically.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, he went on to have, probably what we would think of as much more far reaching thoughts and directions, but that's where he started.
Yes, 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 yes.
Mm,
There's just something about doing it willingly,
mm,
obediently,
yeah,
that puts it in a different category.
yeah, yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I had one. Uh, this was many years ago, but the thought came, and it was a stray thought. It was a
Mm,
stupid thought. I wanted to dismiss it, but it
mm,
said plant a tree.
right.
It did, and I looked at it. I wrote it down. I was being quite obedient, or did write it down, and I said, well, where the hell did that one come from? It's like.
Mm,
Um, and then, but here's the second thought that came. I would feel foolish if I were to go and act on this. And then the next thought was, well, Bill, you like to think yourself really smart. It would be good for you to be
mm,
foolish. Come be a
uh-huh,
fool.
right.
And I did it. And I went to the nursery, bought a tree that was on sale. I planted it in the middle of the backyard. And every day I looked at it for years and years.
Mm,
I always thought of God. It was like my obedience tree. It's
that's right.
amazing.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
it's so interesting because the obviously God's deeper intention for you to embrace the willingness to be foolish
To be
was
foolish.
was
That's
was
right.
more important than the actual planting of the tree. I mean,
That's
that's
right. It's exactly
yeah.
right.
So
Yeah.
that's another dimension, isn't it? To constantly look, what am I being taught behind this
That's right.
this
That's
God
right.
whisper? But then I mean, I've been thrilled with stories that I've heard over the years. For instance, I was thinking to share a story about he was a politician, a very senior politician, who was introduced to the idea of two-way prayer, and a friend suggested that he should listen with nothing to prove, nothing to gain, nothing to justify, and nothing to gain for himself. And he said afterwards, he said, "What a shocking thing to say to a politician. Nothing to prove, nothing to justify, nothing to gain for himself." Anyway, he did, and probably like all of us, sort of expecting some very interesting big thoughts. But anyway, his first thoughts, like as for so many people, were about restoring relationship for him with his wife and with his colleagues. But as he continued the practice, he was a minister in the government. Later he started to have some really radical thoughts for policies that led to having hugely healing and constructive impact on one particular group of people in his country. So he began to look for direction in those bigger issues as a politician, but aware that those small whispers of his needing the sort of daily restitution or keeping his relationships right had to be at the core of it as well. So, we cannot know where simple thoughts might lead.
We're not in charge of that.
No.
Yeah, just do it. Let me close with a line from Batterson here. He says, "There is a way of life for everyone, everywhere. Anyone can be in touch with the living God, anywhere, anytime, if he will fulfill his conditions. When man listens, God speaks. When man obeys, God acts. This is the law of prayer." It's a very different kind of prayer. It's relational prayer. It's two-way prayer instead of just one way into the great void. And then it's listening for that voice. Any closing comments, Jean? It's been wonderful. It's been wonderful hearing from you.
Yes, yeah. Well, Bill, to me, the fact that people can change and listen to God is the one hope for the planet and for humanity. The invitation is there for every one of us. So, yeah, don't forget to RSVP.
That's right. That's right. Well, listen, I want to thank you, Jean, for sharing your wisdom with us and your experience with us. It was simply marvelous. 56 years of listening, and it looks very good on you. I have to say that, and you've encouraged me. First thing I'm going to do in the morning is make my bed and then do my prayers. I will remember that. I want to thank you guys for listening. I hope this was helpful. Please, if you're new, go to the website, look at the little video on two-way prayer, and begin the practice. It is a life changer. It truly has that power to do that, to listen to the best part of you that wants you to become the you that you've always been meant to be, and you're selling yourself short. I love, they talk about alcoholics and addicts have so much potential. He was full, or she was full of potential. Well, take that potency and put it into action, and see where it is that God's leading you. So I hope this information was helpful. It really was to me, on the origins of the program and the practice. And I thank you guys for listening. Jean, continue your wonderful work there in Australia, and I'd love to have you back sometime in the future. And go watch this on YouTube now. We are putting our podcast onto YouTube. It's under the title of Two-Way Prayer. So thanks again. God bless, and keep coming back.